so much for joining us. Really great to have everybody here. And thank you, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Stacy. Welcome everybody to the this kind of wonderful impromptu event for demonstration. And it's just super happy. I'm happy rather to have you here, and we're all happy that you're here to people across the world, different parts of the country, former students, present students, perhaps even future students. Who knows, right? We'll see. But we want you to have a good time. And good morning, everybody. Good morning, Rosetta, Karina. We'll get started in a second. Do you want to say a couple of things about intro there, Peter?
Yeah, so we put together this demonstration from Dan as a way to share, well, both the wonderful work that Dan does and give a bit of an insight into his artistic practice to a curious and hungry public out there, but also to kind of shed some light on some of the exciting things that we're doing in collaboration. Us at Sicily Artist Retreats are coming up to doing a really exciting workshop with Dan in a couple of months. Maybe we'll touch a bit more on that later. But yeah, without further ado, I think I'll hand it over to you, Dan, and you can switch cameras and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Let me say a thing or two before we get started.
Yeah,
and that
please.
is, I've been myself pretty impressed by Sicily Artist Retreats because I know everybody, most everybody involved. I know Bernard, and of course I know Rosetta, and I'm impressed with the notion of setting up a community. In this case, it seems to be a really strong community that's building organically from the ground up in Sicily, designed to help enrich the experience of art students and artist fellows and residents across the world by giving them a more in-depth understanding of the kind of cultural history, the terrain, the light, just the ambiance of an extraordinary place, Marsala, Sicily. And so in terms of looking into it and thinking about where we were just a couple of years ago, we all used to have lots of residencies, and we used to have a lot of trips abroad. We all went to Sicily, we all went to Florence, we went to China, we went to Germany, and then all that stopped. It just went away. And so now we're sort of at this very precious, moment again, where we're rebuilding in a very meaningful way these communities. And so I want to support this community and thank everybody for inviting me to this forum to demonstrate for you. So with that being said, I will share in the chat. This is the deal with me. I'm going to try to be as open and responsive as I possibly can in the course of the drawing demo, which means chat questions all you want. And Peter and Stacy can forward them to me. By the same measure, I appreciate your patience and your understanding with the fact that I do not have two cameras. I have one camera. So I thought I would share with you the image of what I'm going to draw looks like from my perspective. So the way you would use this image is go ahead and download it if you want to, and then you can pop it up on your screen while I'm drawing, so you could take a look at how poor a job I'm doing, and then give me a critique as I go through the motions on what I'm going to be trying to do today. So with that being said, I will try to switch over. And
Fantastic.
This is always the tricky part, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, just saying thanks. That was a wonderful. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, you really summed it up fantastically there.
Oh, great! Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, that's coming through loud and clear, and we got
all right.
a good.
Wonderful. All right. Well, like I said, it's going to be a fairly brief but hopefully meaningful time that we have together with each other. I want to talk a bit about the materials before I get started. The idea of putting a cast in front of the paper, I know, is a bit unusual. So you see the cast. And if you can't, let me know, and I'll try to adjust the camera and the light. But the cast is coming in front of the paper, so it's in front of the picture plane, so to speak. The cast itself has been set with a form light on it. And so when you're practicing this at home, you should bear that in mind, that the more lights you have on your subject matter, the more you could potentially confuse yourself about multiple light sources and the idea of canceling out the forms from different vectors, so to speak. The other thing about the drawing process is I'm drawing on an 18 by 24 inch sheet. I don't know what that is in centimeters, but it's approximately a 1.3 rectangle. And I've got my cast taking up the left side here. And I'm going to be drawing in HB essentially. So I've got a wood encased drawing pencil. That's what this is. It's a Mitsubishi High Uni. It's a Japanese drawing pencil. And I'm going to use a kind of grip on it, which requires that I hold the pencil at about this trajectory. So I tend not to bear down on the tip, everybody. There are different ways of doing this, and they're all legit for you, because whatever way you want to work is your way. This is how we want to talk about this. This is your call and your choice. But to me, this puts too much pressure on the lead, and I wind up digging into the page and almost scratching up the page. So I'm a bit of a control freak on managing the precision of the edge of the graphite itself, the length of the graphite coming off the pencil, and then of course the grip on the pencil. So I like a lightweight wooden case drawing pencil, and I tend to draw with my shoulder and use this stance, which is not the writing grip, not the writing stance. I tend to use the academic stance, which was taught to me by my teacher, Dean Keller. So it works kind of like this. We take the hand and we grip the pencil with the three fingers, the index finger, the middle finger, and the ring finger. And then we hold it with the thumb. And then we use this one little knuckle here as the balancing mechanism for that. Does that come out, sort of loud and clear there, Peter? So this assures, good. This assures that you can pivot with your shoulder. So if you're thinking about just kind of what you can get out of this discussion, this might be takeaway number one. You can draw with your shoulder, so you're lifting your shoulder and dropping your shoulder. So there's a kind of fluid motion with things, and also that you don't wind up hammering the paper with the whole back of your hand, because if you contact the paper with the hypothenar eminence and the pisiform bone, you tend to buckle the page, and you want to keep the page as clean as possible. So that needs to be said. Try these things out, because in calligraphic drawing and writing, different ways of holding the implement are very interesting for your eye and for the feel of your material. There's a book, I think it's Burrow Johnson, talks about this at length in terms of different stances for your pencil or your brush, as the case may be. All right, any questions? Okay, good. So then the next thing, you'll hear this, you can hear that sound. So there's another question about padding the paper, which means putting additional sheets down, which makes the feel of the pencil a bit different. And so when you put a couple of sheets down, rather, on the drawing board, there's almost a softness, like drawing into a cushiony surface. And so some people are really going to like that, and I sometimes use that. But in this instance, I'm going to use the HB and probably an F pencil with just a single sheet. And so there's a certain kind of adherence of touch that you want to be responsive to. So you could try these things out and see how, again, the line feels, because the line isn't always about the lead. It's sometimes about the way you wield the lead, the leverage that you use on the lead, the point of it, and then certainly about the padding of the paper that reveals itself underneath. Okay. Next thing I want to say is we tested out the Zoom just a couple of minutes before you came in. And the purpose of that was to see to it that we could register a couple of marks here that you'd be able to see. So I'm hopeful that you can see those marks on the page. Those marks are very large edits. So if you take a look at the image that I sent you through the chat, you'll notice as I hold up this, this kind of ruler here, it's a school ruler, that what we've got in the surface of the cast is a somewhat intricate, complicated curve. And so if I were to go after that with a very simplified angle, I would call that an edit. And the edit is super important, because the edit allows you to take all the information that you'd see in, again, very, very intricate areas and simplify it. And through the simplicity comes the mobility of saying, okay, there's a decent edit. This may be another decent edit that goes into the top. So again, you see how that's one angle, almost one brush stroke, if you'll grant me that. And the purpose of the one brush stroke is to situate and to simplify, so that there's an overarching tendency toward the simple to allow certain features to come together. So once I have that, I already have an implication through the relationship between this top portion and bottom portion of a certain pitch. And when I say pitch, I mean the way the whole form kind of hangs in space. This is also extremely influential on your drawing. You want to ask yourself, what occurs? What sort of pivot am I going to be looking at if I so-called hang the image in a certain manner? Because that's gesture. We may not have an entire figure here in terms of gestural drawing and, short pose figure work, but we always have gesture, and gesture is essential to get right in the beginning. So as I look at that pitched line right there as an initial line, it's important for me to point out to you, because we're talking about different ways of working, that this line is as simple as I can get, running through the middle. Okay, so I'm not really pursuing an enveloping technique. What I'm trying to do is organize and orchestrate more through the center of the image, again, through a series of big, grand, simple, stupid edits. All right, any questions about that? Feel free to chat them through the chat box. You doing okay, Peter?
Doing great.
All right, take that as a yes. So
Absolutely.
then when I go, okay, good. When I go in and indicate some of these other markers in through here, those are going to have a certain kind of resonance, and they would probably be called testing marks, meaning that I put them in with the idea of what is possible, what's potentially there that we could look for and initiate. Because as we space things out, we're going to get a certain read of the image, and the read that we want may not be what we think we need. And so what we're going to have to work with is the power of being efficient. What does that mean? It means that as I simplify these marks down, as I look at something like this with all of its nuance, and I say, nope, it's got to be that. That subtle lift right in through there gives me an aspect of, I don't know, I wanted to say the word fortitude, but it's more than that kind of thing. It's an ease of handling, because everything is designed to be, incomplete. So sometimes when you teach, you find people that are really, demanding a lot of themselves in the very beginning and giving themselves, so it's like a discouraging gait or something like that, a sense of dejectedness when they put in the image as though it was supposed to be perfect from the outset. And I think more and more what you wind up doing is being, it's like you're poised with an open mind, because when you look at the image, you start studying what's going on, you recognize that there's so much about what you're drawing that you want to understand, you want to learn, and quite a bit of it is mysterious. If it isn't mysterious, it's probably not that interesting, and you want to go draw something that is interesting. But if you could start with something that has a certain kind of mystery, then it has appeal, and then the work goes in to the process to try to reconcile or demystify what you see. And that's what drawing tends to be a lot about in my case. I'm curious what drawing's about in your case. Why do you do it? Why do it in the first place? It's certainly not the common thing, is it, with people? A lot of us have relatives, and they're not quite sure how to react when we tell them that we draw. They say, "You draw? Oh, okay." And they have no idea any kind of a response to that, because they don't really spend their time doing this sort of thing. But there's something about drawing that allows you to understand your subject matter, the person in front of you, the figure in front of you, in a way that's far more meaningful than just looking at someone or something. I think we can all agree on that. But I brought it up to some of my friends and students recently, that we've at some point welcomed certain physicians into the drawing and painting world, and they've talked about close observation and how important close observation is. Even had a marvelous instructor in the medical humanities at Jefferson University talk about how, in his eyes, doctors were increasingly becoming glorified bookkeepers, because all they do is stare at their screens and type and all that kind of stuff. And what he wants them to do instead was to study ways of looking at the figure like you'd get in Frank Netter, so that they could pick up on, recognize certain kinds of physical anomalies or things that would be of greater concern, and stop looking at the computer screen so much. So a lot of this is fundamentally about, I would say, not only closer observation, but the art appreciation component, which is what you're doing, right, Peter? It's art appreciation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Want to talk about that?
Well, in terms of when you say art appreciation, are you referring to in the sense of the building of the community aspect of things that we're doing at Sicily Artist Retreats, or in terms of the lineage of what we're trying to sort of carry on in sort of creating educational communities and residencies of sorts?
I think it's partially about, from my outside perspective so far. I'll have an inside perspective later on, in a few weeks. But looking at looking beyond the obvious, which is to get just this marvelous sense of light and color and atmosphere, in an exotic location, to get that understood and to allow yourself that opportunity to create. What are you walking away with in terms of a kind of artistic cultural understanding that you couldn't get somewhere else? Like, why go there would be,
Yeah.
because there are lots of reasons to go there, but you've been there quite a bit and I haven't yet. So I thought you want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question because I think once you're in, let me put my video back on so people can see my face while I talk. I think once you get there and there is a big difference actually from sort of being in the physical location where a lot of the sort of the techniques with which we study and the technique, the types of art that we all look towards as being, the great classics and the sort of the old masters of sorts, being physically where they were and sort of seeing the light essentially as they saw it, for lack of a better description. There's no real compromise. Like there's no real equivalent to that. You can obviously look at something in a book, and see a photo of a statue or something like that. But when you're on location, you see the ancient temple physically in front of you, and the olive trees leaves blowing and rustling in the wind. There's a kind of it imbues in you some sort of I would say, how to best put it, it imbues a sort of a grandeur to the location, which you tend to, I think, bring into your artwork afterwards, whether you realize it or not. But it essentially, like, it becomes part of you and you're part of your overall experience. And then when you study it, you can't help but like bring some of that with you and impart some of those characteristics and qualities, timeless as they may be, into your own work. At least that's the hope, at least.
Yeah, I would say that was beautifully articulated, and I could also give somebody who's wondering about a practical context a better sense of things, just from my experience. So a number of years back, as I alluded to, there used to be a lot more in the way of working on site, going to Europe, going to these, I would say, exotic locations, but they're almost more than that. They're almost like mythical locations, and one that comes to mind is the site of Aix-en-Provence where Cézanne was working, and nearby in Arles where Van Gogh was working. And so you say to yourself, well, what happens when I move from the situation of looking at those amazing olive trees that Van Gogh painted next to the sanitarium to myself being in the same situation? I mean, it's so kind of surreal to think about, now I've got an opportunity and I've got a chance to put my mark on something based upon similar stimuli and light, and I've got to make sense of that and create a story out of what it means to be alive right now for this limited time, and make something really memorable about that situation. So I think what you said was perfectly articulated, and also it does make you think and ponder. What am I going to do with the time as I go to one of these places and try to make use of that opportunity, which I won't always have, like Sicily or anywhere for that matter. If you go into the room with the specimens, the anatomy, the body parts, the cadavers, how do you use that opportunity so that you don't necessarily walk in and draw a light and shadow piece? You kind of begin to retool your thinking for drawing and for painting, so that it becomes more of a searching mechanism. It's an accounting. It's like a living document, sort of like a big sketchbook, and you wind up analyzing and exploring visual stimuli so that you can walk away with that, and it's embedded and almost burnished into your memory in, again, a very influential way, a way that it inspires you to make more things after the fact.
We have a question here, Dan, from Avi. He's asking, how do you decide the initial lines that you are seeing, or that you're setting, sorry?
Well, I got into a little bit of that first, which was setting up an axis to sort of hang the main shape of the drawing, and the axis being gestural. So part of what I asked myself is, does it feel right? And I hate that phrase because it seems like a phrase like that is somewhat ambiguous and not something that you can walk away with. But feel right refers to this idea of the feeling of weight, the idea of the feeling of thrust, the idea of the feeling of body language. So it isn't an empty comment, because when you go to the figure room and you start looking at people on the model stand, you will get a sense of how the person is standing. And if you look into it a bit further, you might ask yourself, how does that stance feel? Does it feel like a person that's kind of guarded? Does it feel like a person who's very expressive and open, extroverted? Does it feel like a proclamation pose or something like that? Those are really kind of keen things that can awaken your perception to the idea of how to actually hang something, because the pivot opportunity is really a key question. The pivot opportunity here is an application to not only the beginning of a work, but it's also part of composition, because I was just talking about this in the Patreon video. The line idea initiates from some kind of singular statement, some kind of singular thought. And the line idea will branch after that into a series of marks. And that's what I've got here now. And you can see that my marks, what do you see about my marks? They're not concentrated or stressed in any location. If I go into the eye proper, let's say, then suddenly I'm going to stress my mark and start going after likeness. And I'm not interested in any of that, because I'm not ready for that. I think what we need to do is always appreciate the grand abstraction of the scene, which is what I'm searching out and through here. So I'll take my time and just kind of go after the markers that would seem to be the emphasis points to articulate the grand abstraction. And you just have to practice that. You can set that up in your own studio, Abby, by working the light effect on your form, on your subject. You could set it up by, again, working short pose, so that you go after it and you just have to, quickly decide before the pose ends. And so you're limited by the time frame in terms of your strategy. But it is something that you're going to have to get into. Everybody will need to get into, because if you don't set a very clear sense of objectives in the beginning, it can be extremely difficult when you begin to layer information into an ongoing piece, because it becomes convoluted and almost difficult to decipher. Any other questions?
Oh, that was a great answer. Yeah, don't be shy, everyone. Write questions in the chat if as they come to you, and we'll be more than happy to pass them on to Dan as he works.
The other thing that was really appealing and continues to be about this forum, Peter, is the opportunity to connect with folks who initially have been introduced to what I talk about, what I do through the Domestika program. And I think Avi may be one of them, unless I'm mistaken. If I am, I apologize. But this is certainly a great thing what they've done at Domestika, because they've awakened a certain kind of exuberance, enthusiasm for representationalism and realistic pursuits across the world. And a lot of us, it's like when we first started using the internet to find where the great schools were located, we kind of felt pretty much alone for years and years until we, connected, because there wasn't an internet when the whole Atelier rebirth was taking place. And so Domestika is a bit like that. It's like a broad program and a place where like-minded people can connect. So I think that's very similar with Sicily, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're very committed to this idea of building something long-lasting, and in a way, a kind of a sort of a circular nature to the art experience. Oftentimes, you're stuck wondering, maybe you're on your own somewhere and you don't quite have access to these educational institutions, or even knowing where to start your art journey itself. And going to these kinds of retreats, these kinds of workshops, you kind of get almost like a hyper boost exposure to people who are like-minded, who almost inevitably become friends for life, because you end up all discovering that you're essentially all seeking and searching the same thing. And yeah, and that's exactly what we're trying to create. We're trying to create something which ultimately leads to a meaningful impact in our participants' lives. It should be something that you go and do, and that, you know, genuinely marks a turning point in each and every person who attends, you know, artistic development, essentially.
Well, that's the great thing about teaching, because, you know, as you get better and better at the pursuits here, you, and I'm talking about you in the audience who are teachers. I know that there are some of you that are here listening, and I appreciate your being present, but you feel a sense of responsibility, and you want to essentially initiate a succession planning that's successful. You want there to be a place where, you know, you drop off the grid, so to speak, and you end your career, and you see that the movement and the momentum is continuing to advance. And that's really a marvelous thing, because if we can advance it, then what we're doing is preserving this timeless information for future generations to operate in very successful ways. They won't have to relearn how to ride the bike because they'll be sitting on this kind of bed of common knowledge that, you know, people around the world have been pursuing almost disparately, independently. Like, I know there's a great organization in France called Escalier, and I haven't seen them in quite a while, but they've done a wonderful job, and their teachers are fabulous from my experience. And then there have been other schools like the New York Academy that have worked diligently for decades to try to uphold this kind of enabling language, which is what we're talking about. It's a way to speak representationally, which is full of kind of strange attributes and characteristics, such as you would see in a drawing like this. I mean, we're talking about a representational exercise in the form of the cast, but this is full of abstraction. And so there are things in the pursuit which are counterintuitive, and that's why you don't want to lose it and suddenly fall back a bunch of steps in the lineage, so to speak, of where we leave the language once we exit the profession. So that being said, you can again see that my marks are getting just a little tighter, but I'm hoping to keep the marks, you know, not overly stressed. Again, I used that phrase before, but what I mean by that is there's a thing we call too human too soon, and it gets said all the time, and it's a great saying, because if I make this into an eye right now, I suddenly have a dedication and almost a recoil response to the subject matter, because I start to create the feature. And there's an underlying fascinating abstract framework, kind of like a skeleton, but in abstract terms, to every feature. So if I can lay in my marks and just kind of allow those marks to permeate, it would be a bit like an echo, a kind of residual, you know, kind of presence, let's say. I like flowery language, as you can tell, but I don't use it just to sound in some way smart or, you know, articulate. I use it because I love the drawing process and I love the painting process. And you know, as you get better at this and you get more aware of what's going on, you're obligated to continue to make it exciting, or it becomes more like a job. It becomes more like work. And so as I look at these markers, this notion of emphasis, of echo, of stress, you know, these are things that keep the process very vital to me and allow me to look at the process in ways that renew my appreciation of it every time I draw. So I try to expand out from the core, and I wouldn't necessarily normally draw these markers, but as I have them bounce around and through there, to me, that's still part of hopefully effective editing. And the reason why it would be effective isn't because I'm so smart or something like that. It's because they would be communicating. When I say they, I mean, you know, let's take a mark like this one. This will communicate with what's going on in the little system here or the cluster up above, and give you a better sense of where your thought process is going with respect to these relationships. So I try to forge a number of those as I get rolling. And essentially, I begin to think a bit more about locating some kind of an anchor, some kind of a central or nearly central area within the context of the design that can help me, you know, allow the rest of the marks to settle. So I may become a little bit more reliant upon this region and through here, And if I do, I can let my eye bounce back and forth and essentially acquire or build relationships through other markers, other poignancies. For that, I think I'll probably take out a paper stump and begin looking at a few of these markers that will allow me to say, this one is important. You know, all of my strategies up to the moment in the process of development have led me to this, you know, or have led me to that. And that again makes it more organically interesting so that it doesn't feel dry, like you just get up there and make a drawing. Because, you know, how many do you have in you, right? Somebody once said that. Are there any other questions through the chat that you'd like to ask?
I just sent out another reminder that with the image attached, I think it might not have been seen by people who joined later.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so the idea is if you're wondering, I don't have two cameras. I tend to be as open and you know, literal as I possibly can, but I have limited audio-visual infrastructure at this point in time. So I took a shot of my view on this and I sent the shot. And so Peter has just generously shared that once more. So if you want to click on that, you'll see the cast from my point of view, which I will indicate. You know, I'll probably post it in the video once this is complete when I share it on my social media, so that you don't have to look it up. But at this point in time, you do, unfortunately. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we'll send out a recap at the end of this to all the participants and include this image, so you can also rewatch and see the process sort of through Dan's eyes, if you will. So obviously there's a bit of a perspective shift when looking at the cast. So, you know, Dan's position is offset from the position of the camera, which is why there's a difference in the drawing.
Right. But, you know, irrespective of that, the discussion and ideas really matter. So if there's something that's challenging you, you know, a perennial concern in drawing, now's the time. We could talk about it or talk it through, because a lot of this stuff is about your mindset, your strategy, your understanding and interpretation, and how you demystify the process of building a drawing or building a painting for that matter. So
when you're drawing this head, Dan, are you thinking primarily in a sort of a constructive 3D model, or are you thinking more optically in abstract shape relationships, or a mix of both, or how do you find yourself leaning towards?
So there's an optical read that everything is going to have that your eye just kind of grabs onto. And increasingly, as I get into the process of building this or any kind of a drawing, I recognize that the optical read does have specific kinds of structural indications. And so I can't get away from that necessarily. But, you know, when you look at something, when you gaze up or really begin to engage in what we would call seeing and not looking, you start to filter things because you don't see it intentionally all at the same time. It's like when you look at the living model on the model stand and you try to see the tibia, you kind of try to see into the body. And that means that you can sort of avoid certain other aspects of perception. So as I start looking more carefully or thoroughly, I'm not a big fan of the word careful in drawing or painting. I'm hoping that I can stitch together the framework of these larger shapes and get the optical relationship to work out in a way that's inspiring for me. And if I can, then it's all systems go, and a new aspect will come into the drawing later. But at this point in time, it's mainly perceptual would be my answer, mainly perceptual. And the perceptual way of working is one of the ways of studying visual phenomena that has taken the biggest leap in the last few years, thanks to the Atelier system and, you know, organizations like yours and some of the teachers out there, because it's helping people to affirm this ability consistently that they can demonstrate competency on creating accurate optical framework. If they can't do that, then they go back to the cast or back to the image that they're studying, or the addition of images to try to develop that aptitude. So what we're trying to do on top of that in the workshop coming up is to meet people where they are in that process somewhat, to say, okay, if this is the main thing that you're coming here to look at, I can help you with that. But then if you are beyond a point of kind of sheer beginnings with perceptual aptitude, if that makes any sense, I hope it does, then we can get more into the structural and say, how do I dice up, how do I chop up some of this information into structural framework kinds of considerations so that you can take the process forward and develop yourself from there. Because it's really about that. When you show up at any kind of a course or a workshop, it really doesn't have much to do at all with the images that you create in that workshop. It's all about your mind and your heart and your appreciation for what you're doing as you go forward with the next 100 pieces.
Yeah, very well said. It's fascinating to see you drawing there with the stump and using it as an implement mark making tool.
Well, again, it's something that I'm a deep believer in. I feel like I'm one of the main advocates that I know. It is the hill I would die on for the stump. And a lot of people have been so discouraged to look at the stump as a legitimate drawing tool. It is an absolutely legitimate drawing tool. It's one of the best drawing tools we've ever had in our arsenal. And we know that it was utilized as the main drawing tool for a certain drawing applications back in the day, namely the so-called drawing in charcoal and crayon type of drawing approach that was championed by Frank Fowler in the famous 1885 text. And so there's a gigantic page, again, which I shared in the brand new Patreon account I set up to go after a series of simple things that artists would use in their process and in their studio practice. So in 1885, he lays out these wonderful things. You see what an easel looks like in 1885. He tells you about the charcoal in 1885. He tells you about the fixative in 1885. And he says, well, some students use milk, others use Roget's fixative, that kind of thing. And then plastered across one of the pages, I can't remember which one, are two blending stumps. And it turns out that the stump was utilized as an essential tool once you got past the initiation phase of the drawing, where you take the stump as the lay-in tool. You take the vine charcoal as the lay-in tool. And once you laid in your decision-making, kind of like what we are doing here, you'd go in and finish the stronger values with the stump and the Conte. So the Conte was the crayon part, and the crayon idea or the crayon word meant a different thing back in the 1890s and 1880s than it means today. Today, we think about kids' crayons, and we think about the use of crayons in this kind of adolescent beginner drawing way. But crayon was more permanent in that day and age, and the stump was your vehicle to create the finishing utilizing the crayon. So looking back at that and understanding its essential, its vital use in drawing, I've taken to really embrace the tool because I love the tool. I think it's a fabulous tool.
That's certainly an absolutely beautiful mark that it makes, the sort of specificity and also at the same time the airiness and atmosphere that it really.
Well, thank you. It's a painterly mark, and a lot of us are going to pursue drawing in a way that aesthetically mirrors painting. And that's kind of cool because painting, as you know, is this, it's sort of it can turn into this misty, kind of foggy looking practice in a good way. You think of like Eugene Carrier or someone like that in the 19th century who could create this soup of mist or fog, and then essentially kind of peel himself out of that. So he's nested in the fog in some, imposing manner. And paint is just well suited to that. So if I could find an equivalency in drawing that makes kind of an aesthetic echo to paint, then I'm all there. And so I kind of get there with the stump. And of course, I'm going to go back and forth between the stump and a simple tool, because then I can cut the shapes differently or lift them up, because I'm not wedded to anything like a likeness or a feature. I just want to pursue the mechanism of framing of the feature, which to me is far more instructive than getting the feature right itself. More urgent too. So in pursuing that, I need to remember that this idea of darks and lights could be the enemy of a decent process if I employ it too soon. And so I'll try to keep everything just about the same value, because what it does is it leaves me the impression as I go through the process that I'm not after value. I'm after this binary idea of dark and light, and the kind of lively nature of juxtaposing marks of dark and light. So that again, there's a sort of openness and airiness to the qualities that I see. And I constantly stand back and say, wow, this is the best thing going. This is really the most amazing thing I could ever hope to do. If my process turns into anything other than that, I'm going to go do something else. And so it's vital that your process feel exuberant, or it'll start feeling painful.
There's a few questions here regarding the stump. People are wondering if the stump has been toned using charcoal, fine charcoal, or if it's just the HB pencil that's coming off on it and then spreading.
It's a combination of both, really. And there's not really a conscious, me sitting before the demo, toning the stump, meticulously. It's just I've used it so much, and my stumps, all of them look like you can see in the camera. This has sort of been thrown off a building, beaten up and had its lunch money taken, run over by a car, attacked time and time again. It probably has a bullet hole in it somewhere. It's just beaten to half to death. And I like it because it's got personality. So what's the other question?
And the other question is a little more in depth and going in a slightly different direction here. So this is from Dawn, and she's asking or making reference to your very distinctive style that she says it doesn't really have a parallel. And then she wonders, how does an artist go about distinguishing themselves from all the others? And how much is intentional versus individual and personal development?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, it's one of the best questions and a perennial question that could be asked of me or of anyone. And I would encourage asking that question of a lot of people whose work she admires. And I'm really, honored that she considers my style something that is unique. Because it just means a lot. It means a lot to me to do the work that I do. And when we talk about it, I feel like we come to the table as equals and we discuss things that we share a deep fascination with and a love for. So thank you for considering me in such a high light. Here's what I would say. Everybody has to arrive at that in their own organic way. And I'll give you a sense of what I mean by that. As I've studied the process, and as I put it, the language, I have dedicated myself to getting more and more in depth with the language to understand, what is the nature of studying perceptual shape. And once I feel like I've gotten to the floor of that, the depth, the most in-depth point of that understanding and that principle, can I awaken it as a discipline and find a deeper place to understand it so that I can constantly challenge myself to get better at that by thinking about it in a more profound manner. And the same is true of the structure. And so I think probably in my case, it's been through instructing, it's been through preparation as an instructor and trying to become a better communicator, more articulate, more descriptive, hopefully with better, more visionary language that's led me to a place where the work that I'm doing with any luck exhibits characteristics that are part of what I naturally think. I don't believe that it was a thing that was a conscious decision to say, I'm going to draw this way. It's just been part of the way that I've developed. And for that matter, I don't know that you have to consciously search for it. I think if you get more and more aware of why it's so important to you to do this, then it will feed the work that you create, and the work that you make will become more distinctive and emblematic of your own voice. I believe that. And I think that is borne out in many individuals that I've worked with, that I've been privileged to work with over the years as students, because I've seen their work change, transform into something that doesn't feel like anybody else's, just because as they come to the table, they bring something special in of themselves. And when they do that, they kind of teach other people possibilities, the possibilities of visual interpretation according to what they see. And what feels illegitimate at first can suddenly transform into something that other people want to emulate. So I hope that sheds some light on it, but it's a great question, and one that, everybody kind of has to recognize is folded up in the idea of drawing being self-revelatory. it's ultimately about understanding your own mind, your own way of seeing, and becoming more and more familiar with the way that you think.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I have another question here for you, Dan. This one from Richmond, asking about what do you do when you feel like a drawing is not going well or starting to sort of fall apart in the middle stages? And do you have any sort of general tips or maybe some processes that you use to get the picture back on track? And what do you look to identify problems?
Yeah, when the drawing isn't going well, and I wonder if this is the Richmond that I've worked with in the cadaver room. I wonder if it is. If it is, hey Richmond, and it's great to see you here and appreciate you being here. Things usually don't go awry for me. But if the process is breaking down for you, I would say try to journal in your sketchbook when, not just where, but when it happens, and how the image is different. You might want to take a series of process shots of your image and say, okay, here it was working, there it wasn't working. What happened? What did I do to fundamentally transform the process into a place or into a momentum that began to disable itself or disintegrate? Because you can feel when things, there's that word feel again, right? When things are working and when they're not working, but it's hard sometimes to identify a manner of translating that into something else. I'll give you an example. There's something that we talk about in composition, and it comes out of this thinker and visionary called John F.A. Taylor, whose book I really love because he tries to take on equilibrium in very flowery ways. And he discusses this thing that he calls normative equilibrium. And you think to yourself, what is normative equilibrium? And he says that which once achieved, the artist is dedicated to preserving. That which once lost, the artist is dedicated to restoring. So he's talking about a feeling that you have in the image, in the picture, where it feels right. And in his case, he's a very big proponent of the idea of balance, like visual balance, visual weight. And as soon as you start to add any degree of complexity to an image, you acquire different areas of focus and magnetism that alter the visual weight. But that would be one example of how you could maybe navigate through that issue. Because there's some things that you'll find probably that you have a knack for, even as other things begin to fall apart. In my experience, most of what people seem to lose sight of involves the structural and the lack of structural clarity. And so the structural clarity question is another perennial concern, because if you don't have good structural seeing, you're likely to default to copying the image once you get to the modeling phase. And so you've got to have a way of interpreting and almost x-raying and visualizing what you have in front of you as a matter of architecture and complex organic architecture at that. And I think that's one of the reasons why the construction part in structural drawing has been so vital for my practice, because I find it fascinating and I find it to be a big void in the arsenal of most art students. Do I still have you?
You do.
Is anybody throwing fruit? I hope not.
Hopefully not. No, it's fantastic. It's beautiful to see this, to see the image emerge out of the abstraction of lines.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it. There are things that begin to change, to alter the process the further along one gets in the process. And one of those things is the nature of some of these landmarks. So over here, we have a landmark. As I lay this, let me see if I can find a better pointing tool. I'll grab my gigantic, HB pencil. So we have a zygomatic in through here. And so we have all this information that's tucking back behind the zygomatic bone that will change the way that we interpret things, because then we have to contend with the fact that it is indeed architecture and needs to be directed to a place going back in space into an extreme foreshortened zone, folks, that allows us to hopefully systematically and ingeniously embed information as it cycles back there like waves of, form. And so part of that is, beginning to look at the shapes in a different manner. Part of that is trying to comprehend and reconcile the existence of anatomical framework beneath, like the bone structure of the cranium and such. And part of that is maintaining, a sense of when and where to use things like midline. How do you take the midline and utilize it first and foremost as an axial kind of directive thing, like the axis idea that I posited earlier, and then shift that over to a topographical kind of, concern. Device may be better than concern in this case. So what that would entail is then taking the shape and ever so slightly bearing down on the shape in a certain manner to say that fundamentally the centers here are off to the right of the centers up here, which are off to the left, which will encourage a way of seeking out depth, the beginning of depth in the image. So that is another really fun aspect of contending with an image, because the image is like clay. You have to knead it and kind of push it and pull it around. And I really like that about it. And that's one of the reasons why I don't really pursue each principle to the point of being brittle. I want the principles to overlay each other and give me enough insight and stoke my momentum so that I can then add additional insights and try to mold that clay into a better result.
Fantastic. I have a few more questions here for you,
Sure.
Dan. Just going to scroll back up. Oh, and a confirmation. It is the Richmond from the cadaver room.
Oh, great. Nice to see you, Richmond. Say hi to Remy.
And then here's a question. So asking to someone who's committed, sorry, let me read that again. So for someone who's committed to their art,
somebody who's committed, you mean like to an insane asylum? Just kidding. Go ahead.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
isn't that all of us?
Exactly. Someone who's, let's say, dedicated to their art. Would you say that that sort of formal art training is essential, or is it something that, to reach this kind of state, that which you're demonstrating, is that something which can also be achieved through self-study and perhaps workshops and sort of a more kind of, tailor-made system? Or what are your thoughts on that? And just in general, like different art, different ways of learning, let's say.
I mean, I think the engine of inquiry and healthy kind of and let's say an intellectual appetite is so vital for things. You have to be patient. If you do workshops, if you do classes with people, including me, you want to be patient with the instructor, but mainly with yourself, because there are going to be some workshops that really speak to your sense of momentum and aptitude. And there are going to be some workshops which maybe at some point they sail over your head, or they don't feel right, but they eventually will feel right. And then you have to allow yourself to learn at a certain pace. So I certainly think that workshop instruction is and has been throughout my experience one of the main benefit. It's like it's a vehicle that has proved much more valuable than I think some people give it credit for. When organizations do not look at it mainly as business, and I believe that that yours is one of them here, where you're really trying to build a community and not necessarily just followers or customers.
Exactly.
You find yourself in a room full of people, and this has happened to me again and again and again, where we're in a workshop situation, and I sit there at the end of it wishing that my regular students had the same focus that the people in the workshop have, because they are dialed in, laser focused. I mean, they're just ready. They prepared, their attention span is right on. And there's something about that focus and that determinism to get the information, even if it's in a concentrated dose, that I think is irreplaceable. And so I've actually been quite taken with this, because in some situations where the workshop participant would wish that they were in a regular class, I'll go into the regular class and I'll see people not necessarily show up focused, not necessarily show up on time, not necessarily become intellectually ready, because the deal with a class, as you know, is it's a two-way street, and you can't really teach someone who isn't ready, who hasn't invested in themselves mainly. But there's really a kind of symbiosis between the instructor and the person in the workshop that needs to be recognized in order for you to get the most out of it. So to the extent that you can take the workshop model to heart and pursue these, it really depends a lot on your temperament and the way you absorb the information and how patient you are with yourself.
Yeah, and there's something to be said, I think, also about the fact that to go to a workshop requires essentially a conscious act of will. You're stepping out of perhaps a routine of daily life that is quite different from that of perpetual study, but it is nonetheless to pursue something that is incredibly important to you. And perhaps that's where you then see these, sort of almost like a natural selection of people who want it really badly and who are really dedicated in that case to their craft and to their own development as artists.
Absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. And I would just add one thing, which is it was a few years back. I was teaching at the League, and I used to run into a colleague of mine who I think you've had as an instructor in recent years, named Costa. And so Costa and I were having this conversation. Costa is a very wise, amazing instructor by all accounts. And we were discussing the sort of student aptitude question. And we were in this really memorable conversation because I'm still thinking about it to this day. And we both landed on the same word when we were describing the ideal student. And it was very consciously not talent. It was not talent at all. It was temperament, because the temperament of a student is more important than the talent of the student. If you have a temperament which is impatient, abrasive, you expect this to happen of yourself or of the instructor, then there could be something to be said about wasting your time, because your attitude is canceling out the potential benefits of the experience. Whereas if you have a student who has this incredible capacity for self-reliance, this engine of inquiry, and this kind of healthy amount of humility with the process, and with the long-term dedication, and even a sense of expectation for what that will yield in a career sense, then you've got yourself a person who is very likely unstoppable, because their trajectory is only going to lift constantly as they go forward.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's interesting too, I think, that with the recent collective experience of lockdowns and the move to distance-based learning and such, that I think there's really something though to be said about the experience also of being physically present in the room with the instructor and seeing seeing it in almost like more than real time. I'm excited that we're coming back into a world where this is possible again.
Yes, I am too. And I have to say that I learned a lot through the pandemic, the kind of horrors of all of that. And there were instructive moments, even though a lot of it was quite difficult and quite uncertain, and instilled a sense of fear and paranoia in everybody that lingers to this day. And so I wouldn't say that the virtual is necessarily bad, and nor would I infer that you were saying that. But I would like to make the clarification statement that virtual is a different form of teaching and requires a different kind of understanding for how to get the point across than in-person does. And I think we all yearn for in-person because we yearn for connection to similar temperaments, and connection to a kind of way of bouncing ideas off of fellow constituents in ways that can enrich our understanding and appreciation and momentum in the future. So virtual is great because you can do that with people that are in different continents, but in person, it goes without saying, in person is the mainstay. And so much of what you're really dealing with is enabled by in-person learning, because if you're like me and you're drawing in this situation, all you have to do is pivot your own head or station point to a different place, and you see around the form. So that means when you come back to the drawing spot, so to speak, you draw with a sense of expectation for what you should be seeing, and what's the right word? Implying. You should be implying long term.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there's a really good complement and harmony between those two forms of learning, sort of a breadth and depth of sorts. And I I guess there's something what I've always really liked, having done online and in-person education, the in-person education, it's in a way, yes, of course, you're getting sort of the same technical specific details are the same potentially, but it's almost like more of your senses are being actively engaged. Even the sort of the sights, the sounds, the smells, the way you're feeling, the way you're sitting in the room, the way the energy in the room is reading. There's a lot of stuff happening that I find all contributes to the overall learning experience. That's really quite exciting and makes it very thrilling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say that fundamentally at the end of the day, so to speak, you work in person, like that's what you're doing. When you're working in the context of a virtual situation, you're still, making or deploying the skills in an in-person setting. It's just your own setting. And so that's the natural context of all of them, is to do it in your studio space. So yes, by all means, there's something there. The cool thing about the virtual is the accessibility of so many kinds of temperaments that we haven't had access to. We've had museum curators who would never have done this were it not for the pandemic. We have innovators coming in and saying, maybe we should try teaching, this particular form virtually because it could add something to the learning outcomes. So all sorts of things have transformed the industry, so to speak. And I think we need to be conscious of that because those things have also influenced in-person learning, to the extent that when you're a teacher like me and you come back to in person, you say, let me see if I can get the same, effect or impact or, outcome that I was getting when I was teaching this particular skill virtually, because I was really happy with that kind of thing. Or if you're just thinking about like the use of slides back in the old days, we all had these slides we would drop into a slide carousel, and how much PowerPoint has changed in annotation. And you could do a lot of that virtually and get somebody prepped in a way that is quite different and very enabling, because they could see the benefit of a digital application to an otherwise proudly analog practice.
I have a few questions coming in here,
Yeah, sure.
asking about the Sicily workshop. Actually, there's one here asking about if you could go into any sort of detail about your thoughts and plans for the workshop itself. Maybe I'll let you start with that, and then
yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll let you go with that one.
So the first idea, and I got into this a little bit already, which is that I thought that if I were to describe the outline while I'm drawing here, it might make the process a bit convoluted. And I would invite you to take a look at the outline that's posted already on the site, because you'll be able to see the general plan. And the plan is a very ambitious plan. It's a plan that I wrote out and Peter and I revised together because we felt that it would appeal to a lot of different kinds of artists at different levels. So mainly what it means is meeting somebody where they are in the process. So if you come out to Sicily and you have this yearning or nagging question about drawing concerns, you might want to draw the entire time. You might want to study the figure the entire time, and we could focus on aspects that might enable you more thoroughly to jump that hurdle, to reach beyond that boundary and that obstacle which is preventing your work from advancing. If, on the other hand, your main question concerns color, you may come to Sicily and we would engage in a certain manner to make the color, the mysterious color question, as it always is, a bit more accessible to you, so that you can understand how to deal with a specific kind of color framework, the lighting, the environment. It could be outdoor color, which we could work with, certainly the figure color. It could be the idea of composition, and certainly can and probably will be steeped in structure. But to a large extent, answering the question accurately means evaluating the constituency, like who shows up and what they want to learn. And that's really, I think, an important part of a good takeaway from any workshop. To have the plan is one thing, but to have the person there with a good idea of what they want to get out of the plan is even better.
And something I think which is interesting and quite unique actually to what we're doing here is that we have a melange of depending on the workshop itself, but in this case it's a largely studio-based studio practice workshop working from the live model and figurative, but we also mix into that the opportunity to get hands-on experience with on-location plein air painting. So
yes,
it's quite a different sort of space, but there's really valuable lessons I think that can be taken from one and brought into the other, and that dialogue can kind of cross between the two different art making practices, and problems that emerge in one will provide answers that will unlock something in the other, and that's quite a unique value proposition I think that we have going at the moment.
For sure. And it brings back the idea about the incorporation of art history to the process of not only art appreciation, but working more smartly in your process. And an example would be the vast influence that the plein air landscape painters play in the development of color. So when you're thinking about how to use a more effective color or temperature spectrum in your model, you go back to the plein air question and going into that arena, which is a changing light arena, which makes you really push the palette. And so if you bring the principles of that kind of learning objective into the figure, you wind up pushing in certain aspects, you wind up exploring possibilities of color mixing in areas like in the shadow of the body, which have been traditionally the terrain of a lot of formulaic scene. And so you're exactly right. Getting yourself in a situation where you're in an environment which is historically gorgeous and important, but also, let's say, forgiving, because people are walking around you and they understand that you're just another crazy artist and you want to paint landscapes and learn color. You don't always get that, especially in a place like New York City. You're not necessarily getting stuff thrown at you, but that's a really valuable thing because you're among like-minded individuals in a place where anybody with a degree of sense would want to paint because it's that beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I see a question here, but I think I can answer this actually, asking about the setup that we have at Sicily Artist Retreats in terms of the type of studio space. And so we've gone to a lot of effort to build a professional working environment that basically creates the, I would say, I mean, you can never say the perfect environment for learning, but it is close to ideal, as close as we can get, and it'll be something that we continue to build on and improve as artists come through it and use it. But it's something we're very proud of because I think it removes that one aspect from the that one friction point from the equation. Your materials are good, your location is ready, you just show up and you can do your best work basically.
Sure. Yeah. And then there's the other question that a lot of artists have these days about painting in exotic locations is how to acquire materials which are forbidden for acquisition or for transport. And you've got that taken care of as well, I presume, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a big issue. And the other thing that comes to mind from my experience is the issue in question of weight. Meaning that when you go to an exotic location that has real historical beauty like Sicily, are you going to be dragging a lot of stuff all over the place? And how much of a strain is that going to put both in terms of time and energy? Yes. And I think you've got that taken care of.
We've got that taken care of. And that's one of the things, I mean, traveling internationally, with oil paints and with, plein air painting equipment and so on and so forth, or even canvas rolls. I mean, it can very quickly add up. You suddenly find yourself bogged down with art equipment. We obviously welcome everyone to bring their favorite art supplies to work with, but we also stock everything that's needed and have a lot of it available, and quite a bit of it is actually provided and included in the workshop itself. So obviously all things like solvents and mediums that can't be taken on a plane are of course included. We also stock really fine grade Belgian linen, We have all of the pochade boxes your hearts could desire to have on loan and use, and join us for some of the outdoor sessions. We have we have all of the paper sizes that you would need. We have pretty much everything, actually. You could almost basically show up with virtually nothing, and you would have all the tools at your disposal to make great work. And obviously, on sort of a technical level, we can also provide assistance with shipping any work back to wherever you're coming from.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, that's really helpful. That's another big thing that is of great interest. I noticed that the dates that you have would be consistent with works drying, which is also really a big question. You know, how do I get to the end of an experience like this and deal with a wet painting? Sometimes in workshops, you know, they're ending and you've done your best work and you got to get on an airplane the next day. So you spend half the night trying to pack something in between the canvases so that they don't stick together and create a monoprint.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of that kind of thing. So I'm happy that I noticed on the itinerary that it doesn't necessarily just end and you get on the plane and all that stuff. There's a bit of a grace period, right?
Exactly.
Great. Well,
oh no, sorry, Dan. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to take that opportunity there, but I thought it was a pause to talk a little bit about some of the sort of aspects of the workshop outside of the workshop. So obviously there's the learning component, but our workshops are all inclusive, which means that also your accommodation is factored in, and all of your meals and transportation to the various sites that we go to and visit, group tours, entry into museums. There's some really phenomenal and quite important archaeological and artistic finds located in and around Sicily, and we're very lucky to be close in proximity to a few of them. And these are things that we take people to as well, to really be able to get up close and personal with the culture and history of Sicily. And obviously, when you say culture and history of Sicily, you can't really go too far without hitting food at some point, and food is a big part. You need food to stay energized and learn, and you need and it's definitely part of the culture, and it's quite fantastic, and we're very lucky to be working with a fantastic hotel. It's gorgeous, nestled in amongst an olive grove, with a wonderful chef who cooks from locally sourced fresh produce, actually grown, quite a lot of it, in and around the gardens of the hotel. So after a sort of a long day of learning and pushing your brain to the max in a way, it's quite nice to be able to come back and sit by the pool and have a discussion about what are the things that have what has transpired that day. And it's sort of there's a sort of a tension and release sort of situation where the intensity of the focused learning, and then the kind of almost like the unwinding at the end, which creates for just a wonderful rhythm to the whole event.
Wow, that's not something you hear every day. So the only problem you're telling me is coming back from all of that, back to reality, back to the terrestrial world where you don't have gourmet Sicilian food. Maybe that in an additional pant size, no?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Maybe have the stretch pants, but it's a risk.
I'll have to work on that. So I'll get myself ready, but that does sound extraordinary and really like a lot of fun, because you kind of get people sometimes in these workshops that have, appropriately so, a multitude of interests. So it could be interests in exotic food. It could be interests in cooking and in cuisine. It could be interests in art history and archaeology. It could be interests in a variety of things, in addition to the obvious, which is visual art and an intensive opportunity to learn the figure and color in an outdoor setting as well. So
yeah,
can't beat it. Beautiful. I suppose we ought to begin thinking about, because I know everybody is short of time. And we're moving toward a conclusion in this day's festivities. I don't want to say this morning or afternoon, because somebody might be on here and it's nighttime, but if there are any additional questions, happy to answer any of them. And I don't know if you don't mind if I continue drawing.
No, please do. So there is one more, well, there's another question here that I see asking about your thoughts on the differences, or let's say the value of working from plastic casts and the value from working from the figure, the live model, which is what we'll be doing in the workshop. And then in relation to the sort of the value of ancient statues, or let's say the value of what you can learn from studying from these types of statues, asking if you're familiar with the Praxiteles statues that are found in Sicily, the dancing satyr of Mazara.
Oh, well, I guess I will be much more so by the end of the experience, which I can't wait to engage in, so that I can get more enriched myself with Praxiteles. It's hard to imagine somebody more vital to the kind of patrimony of aesthetic, the aesthetic implementation of human features in the Western art sense than Praxiteles. And I am a huge advocate of working from the human body, because the human body, to me, to my way of thinking, contains not only a host, but all of the essential array of design and constructive and aesthetic themes that you'd want to explore as an artist. So there's a reason why, as Stephen Perkins so beautifully said years back, he said, if people went into the French Academy and they said, I want to be an architect, they would be directed to the figure. And if they came in and said, I want to be a sculptor, they would be told, go draw the figure. And if they wanted to be, so on and so forth. And that was true then, and that is true now. And the fact of the matter that they are also us is quite fascinating, because we're essentially kind of beginning to understand fundamentally at the core of it all why we are so vastly beautiful ourselves. It isn't only about cliched things. There's a whole manner of layered aspects of seeing that would make it so in your work, that derive from the figure and that get pulled into your design, theme making, your storytelling, so on and so forth. So I've never seen anything more beneficial than working from the figure in a life situation. And the cast is the next best thing. You want to, if you're kind of looking at this at home, viewing this at home, and you want to transition into the figure, the cast is your bridge. This is your bridge, because when you have a representation of the figure, aesthetically filtered as it may be, you can still get around it. You can still gain access to it by various points of view and various ways of lighting the form. And you'll be able to make a lot more sense out of this example than you would from a photograph, for that reason, because your eye and your mind as interpretive vehicles can give you advantages that you wouldn't have otherwise, because you'd be just kind of bouncing off of a flat image, trying to say, God, I wish I could see around that, or I wish I could see around this. So you definitely have to take whatever measures are necessary to acquire, a cast or two of a form or a subject that you really like, and begin to delve more deeply into the phenomenon of not just the look of that cast, but how it impacts your process and the way that you build out, your abilities into something that makes you really flourish. I feel like I talk in gigantic run-on sentences, but I hope that's all right.
Quite okay. I'm just posting a link into the chat. This is a link to a Facebook group that we have that I would invite everyone to welcome everyone to join. And in case anyone has a question that comes up afterwards, or something that they're unclear of, this would be a great place to go and ask it. And obviously, if anything comes up, we can reach out and pass it on to Dan and try and get it back to you, obviously in a timely manner. But that would be sometimes it happens. Zoom demos finish all too soon, and then you think, shoot, I didn't ask that one question. Well, this would be the place to go.
That's right, that burning question. And as I said earlier today, I'll make a little shameless plug on my own. I've just started a Patreon account. It's brand new, and I started doing some work. And I did it because it would be a very inexpensive way of connecting with students like those who have been on Domestica and that sort of thing, of taking it to the next step and having more creative control over the lessons. So I will at some point also post the full demo with the inserted actual perspective on the cast on that account. I don't know when, but I think both of us will be sharing this and answering your questions, and we look forward to doing so, because we're all about community and encouraging everybody to get to the next step on everything.
Absolutely.
Eventually we wind up crossing paths. It's a kind of a small world, and that's why it's important that everybody recognize each other and continue to connect in a spirit of goodwill and good faith. Good faith is really important.
Absolutely. Well, it's been
all right. Any final questions, anybody?
Yeah, now's the time to squeeze them in. We have about 6 minutes left on the clock. So if there's any final questions,
I can say about the drawing process, if there aren't any, it
might be interesting to hear.
Bridge.
Yeah,
that the effort at some point, about a point like this, is to begin to conjure up structural indications about what lies within the shape. There are so many examples; it's almost hard to name one or two of them. But there's a core moment right about here, if you can see in the drawing, where I'm going to be looking at the identification of a deeply inset or inserted structural. It's not so much a landmark. I mean, it is a landmark, but it's a landmark with a lot of character. And so that's the deal with structure. You want to get into the structure further and develop an affinity for the character within the shape. The characterization of the shape would be giving the shape a certain flair for structure. And so if I put that in there, of course, we're going after the tear duct, but the way that the tear duct will look in the living model with this specific kind of light and shadow is not going to be what we expect. It'll carve itself out in again, a way that it stokes your enthusiasm for what could happen in the figure. It's all about possibilities and awakening a greater perception and a more enriched aesthetic result. So I might transition over to here with the marker in the cast, and then over and through there, because I'm looking for another place to land. So this marker, you may not be able to see this from the drawing, but there's a very specific kind of accent that sits in through there, which would want to be part of the structure again. And so I'm going to travel around and just begin to tease out some of these structural aspects to see to it that they attach themselves appropriately to the midline, and they give me a good sense of positional perspective. So I'm saying, well, the cast or the subject is placed himself, herself in a position where all of these elements are aligning with that position. So that's going to mean that I go after a different characterization here and allow that characterization to get set in context and harmonized with the other accents. If that isn't the case, obviously we have to attend to it, but it isn't the same drawing, an hour and a half into the process as it would have been at the very outset. Importantly so, for the sake of not just repeating oneself again and again, because the process is transformative as you are in your development as an artist. Accent to accent. So these accents, they also have a tradition in and of themselves. This is called sulcus, or mentolabial sulcus. It sits on the midline, and it's going to rest in a certain place relative to the other accents that we just want to understand. So we won't make it through this process in the next 3 minutes and 20 seconds, but we will be a little further along, and hopefully it helps to give you a sense of where this is going to go.
That's fantastic.
Excellent.
When you finish, when we finished here, we'll make sure that we have a photo of the drawing too, sort of a high res image that we'll send out to make sure that everyone, you can see the drawing. There's always a bit of compression on Zoom, even though it's a pretty good picture quality coming through. But we'll definitely make sure to get that out to all the participants here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't look worse when it becomes decompressed.
I'm sure it won't.
Great. Well, once again, I want to thank everybody for being here today and for sharing some of your Saturday with Stacy, Peter, and myself. It's really a pleasure to have this discussion and to engage with people again and again about something that we really all care about. And we need to make sure that we expand the common awareness of, so that the appreciation can develop a momentum of its own and continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'd like to say, likewise, huge thank you to everyone who came and took time out of their busy schedules and spent time with us tonight, or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're based. and thank you to you, Dan, for being with us and creating such a captivating and enjoyable demo to watch. It was really a pleasure.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And once again, best to everybody, and I hope to see you all pretty soon. All right.
Fantastic. Well, then I think with that, we'll wrap things up. We'll send out a wrap-up information packet, which will contain the images that we mentioned before, and after a certain amount of time, we have to get the video that's been recorded of this session, and we'll make sure to get that out to the participants as well. So expect an email coming soon from us, and if you have any questions for either myself or for Dan, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll be happy to hear from you.
All right, you guys, thanks a lot for being here. Appreciate you very much. Here's my hand.
Thank you.
I'll see you all later. See you in a future workshop, and maybe I'll see you in Sicily.